Hi, everybody. Welcome to PCS 101. My name is Lillian Ruiz, and I am the instructor for the class. So what I wanted to do in today's video is to give you an overview of what we will be doing over the course of the semester. And I'm assuming that you already have some familiarity with Moodle if you are watching this particular video. So I'm going to start by drawing your attention to our Moodle site. And you can see that at the top of our site, there is a section that is entitled General. And that is how you can navigate our online course. So you can see that the first blue icon is syllabus and other documents. And that's where I am posting our class syllabus, our class outline, and any of the other hard copy documents that I would have distributed to you in a face-to-face class. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. In the icon below that, you will see past class sessions. So basically what I do is I retire a week and then I post it in past class sessions and I keep the current week up so that's easily visible on our Moodle homepage. So you can access the entire semester over the course of the semester, but what you will see very easily is the week that we are on. Underneath that, there's another icon that's entitled Discussion Form, which is where you will be answering some what I call attendance questions. That would be our discussion form, what we would have been talking about in a face-to-face class if we were having a class discussion. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. And then we have two optional icons underneath that. One is in green, it's optional chat. So if you ever wanted to chat with your classmates or with me, you could do so through there. And then finally, an optional Zoom, where if you wanted to meet with me via Zoom, that's where my Zoom contact information is. And underneath that, you can see that we are on our first week of the semester. And if we were meeting in a face-to-face class, we would normally meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. So what I'm planning on doing over the course of the semester is posting videos much like this one every Tuesday and Thursday to have you watch them. These videos would duplicate or attempt to duplicate what I would have talked about in class in a face-to-face situation. And you will see that below the video, there will be the class notes for that particular video, which is basically what I would have been posting, let's say, on a whiteboard if we were meeting in a face-to-face situation. So you can see that for today, the 15th, Tuesday, though you might be watching this on Monday because the summer session starts on Monday, but again, we would be meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that on the first day of class, I've devoted the entire class just to introduction. And your discussion form question is going to be based on basically introductions, where I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to the class, and you're free to include pictures, video, or audio, but not required. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. What I wanted to do was to talk about the syllabus and course outline, which again you can find in the syllabus and other documents folder. I encourage you to make print copies of the syllabus and all of the other documents. It's just easier to access that way. I'm using print copies myself as I go through the syllabus with you. And you can see that at the top of the syllabus, there's just some contact information. So we are meeting in the summer session. The summer session is condensed. So if you've never had a summer session before, we do basically the same work that we would do in an academic semester, but twice as fast. So we meet for approximately 8 weeks rather than 16 weeks. So we do the same amount of work, it's just organized differently. And you can see that my name is on there, Lillian Ruiz. Most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal. Feel free to call me whatever you feel comfortable with. My email is there, which is my surname, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. And my email address is a little bit different than most email addresses because it doesn't include the first initial. And the reason why is because when I started at GCC, in 1993, no less, not everybody had an email address. And we were in the very early days of the internet. And we found out very quickly that just by giving email addresses with only surname, what we would end up doing was creating a lot of chaos and a lot of duplication, which is when the first initial was instituted. So if you see somebody with an email address that's just their surname, they've probably been in GCC for quite a long time. My phone number is there, where it'll take you to my line in my office where you could leave a message, and I'll be checking my messages over the course of the semester. 775-1236. My office is North 328A. Now, it being a summer session, I wouldn't necessarily be in my office. And for office hours, that would mean that we would need to make some sort of an appointment. So I wanted to talk about the textbook because the textbook Principles of Public Speaking has gone through many editions. The newest edition, which is what I ordered for our class, is the 21st edition, which happens to have actually a new editor. So the 20th edition and previous, it was a different editor, German, but now we have another editor whose name is Horn. And note that on the syllabus there is a typo. It says Houghton, and that's not correct. It should be Horn. That's the 21st edition. That's the ideal edition to use because it is obviously the most recent. But you can certainly use older editions as well. The GCC library, I believe, has an older edition on reserve so that you can access it there. And I'm working with the GCC library to get a newer edition, the newest edition, actually available for you on reserve. Just note that if you're using an older edition, that some of the page numbers or chapter headings might be different, but I will be covering all of the elements that are in the newest edition. It's also assumed that students will have a good dictionary at the source for reference, and I'm quite aware that everybody's got access to that electronically, but having access to something and actually using it can be two different things. Just the use of the thesaurus, being able to come up with synonyms or words with similar meanings, or sometimes antonyms, words with opposite meanings, can be very useful when you're trying to put together an argument, which is what public speaking is about. And I know that this might seem a bit odd to have public speaking in an online format. I certainly thought that. I taught public speaking in person for years until COVID-19, and when everybody had to pivot, and realized that it actually makes a certain level of sense, particularly with how the world changed after COVID, and so much of our communications are done just this way, electronically, whether it's done through video or social media or Zoom or whatever the case may happen to be. So it's different than speaking to a live audience, but it's a skill that is just as important. So obviously, since we don't have a live audience, we need to adapt somewhat, which I will be talking about shortly. But the description for this class, which is applicable to whether it's face-to-face or an online, is that this class focuses on the principles of public speaking as communication, stressing the role of the speaker in the communication process. The course emphasizes the proper preparation and delivery of speeches, and each student delivers a minimum of 5 speeches and participates in small group activities. So the prerequisite for this class is English 101, 103, or 105, or concurrent enrollment. That's what we call English 101 at GCC, so that you've taken an introductory composition class or its equivalent at another institution. So you already have a sense of how to put together an argument. In fact, there are lots of similarities with writing a paper and putting together a speech, but there are also lots of differences as well. And in fact, my primary teaching load is English classes. However, over the years, I've branched out to public speaking and communication classes, such as media and popular culture. And yes, I'm the one who teaches the class in horror film. So I've got lots of eclectic tastes, so to speak. And if I were to continue on by reviewing the syllabus, you'll see that the student learning outcomes are that as a result of successfully completing this course, you'll be able to, 1, improve oral communication skills. And I have this on all of my syllabi, whether it's an English class or a communications class or a public speaking class. to develop skills and self-confidence in acquiring and presenting information. And sometimes you already know what it is you're going to be talking about in a speech, so it's just a question of putting together that information. But sometimes you need to do research, and we're going to need to talk about how to do that efficiently and effectively. To apply critical and analytic thinking, which is also something I have on all of my syllabi for all of my classes. And critical thinking is not a negative as in criticism. It's about asking questions. It's about interpreting and analyzing. It's about what toddlers do really well. They ask why a lot. I've always said that that is the distinction between high school and college. In high school, you learn what, in college, you try to determine the why. To promote a greater understanding of communication in formal and informal settings, obviously we communicate differently based on the situation. We talk differently at a party than we might in the workplace. We talk differently if we are presenting to a face-to-face audience as opposed to an online audience. And also to encourage each student's unique sense of voice. You shouldn't sound like the textbook, nor should you sound like me. You should sound like yourself. Your personality really is your greatest strength, as we will discuss. So procedures, how to do this in an electronic format. I will post a video myself, much like this one, discussing class material by the time our class would normally meet in person. So if we were meeting in a face-to-face situation, we'd meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. So you can expect a video from me every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m. Though to be quite honest with you, I'm going to try to post videos the night beforehand if at all possible. You have 48 hours, a 48-hour deadline to watch that video for that class and answer its corresponding attendance question that will be posted in our class discussion forum. And I count that as attendance for your class. So any additional interaction you have with your classmates in the discussion forum is counted as participation. It would be similar to participating in a live class, where you're not required to participate, but you certainly are encouraged to participate. I realize some students learn best by participating, others learn best by listening. So you decide how much or how little to participate. So you don't need to respond to your peers, but what you are expected to do is to read your peers' responses and my responses in turn, because I will be responding to all of you. And doing so would give you an idea of the class discussion that we would have had in a face-to-face situation. So if you watch the videos, which you are required to do, this will give you a sense of the content I would present in class. And you read all of the discussion forum responses, that'll give you a sense of the class discussion that we would have had. We will have some written periodic quizzes over the course of the semester, open book, open notes, advertised in advance, and I'll discuss them in more depth as the semester progresses. And I will ask you to return them to my email, which is ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu, because that's how my grading program works best, via PDF. And then I can return the quizzes to you. So what we will be doing over the course of the discussion is some class discussion and group work via the online discussion forums, some mini lectures via the videos that I'll be posting, and student speeches. And your student speeches, instead of presenting to a live audience, would be pre-recorded, much like this class now is pre-recorded, and posted for your peers to watch, and your peers would be sending me feedback of your performance. I would be gathering all of that feedback and then presenting it to the class as a whole anonymously. So again, if we were meeting in a face-to-face situation, obviously you would be presenting live to an audience, and speaking to a camera is a different sort of experience, particularly if you don't have a lot of experience with speaking to a camera, but we will be talking about that as the semester progresses. So I suspect that most of you have cell phones that would allow you to record. In fact, I'm using my cell phone to record right now. And I will also be suggesting that you upload your speeches onto YouTube, and I will be giving you some instructions on how to do that. And then you can post that onto our Moodle site, and I will also be providing instructions on how to do that. That's probably the most seamless way to go about doing that. Course requirements. Students are expected to complete all of the reading, all of the writing assignments by the due date. There will be 3 graded speeches assigned. The first one will be 5 minutes long, and it will be an autobiographical speech. This is where we get to practice our skills, where we get to basically introduce ourselves in more depth to our class. Our second speech will be 10 minutes long, twice as long. It'll be an informative speech in which you get to teach the class how to do something, or you will teach the class about something. And then our third speech, the longest of the speeches, 15 minutes long, a persuasive speech, where you will try to convince the audience of taking a particular position or action or both. So failure to deliver a speech on the date assigned will result in failure for the assignment unless the student has unforeseeable emergency and justifiable reasons based on the evaluation of the instructor. Because basically you're making a commitment with your audience because your peers are going to have to watch your speeches and be able to give me feedback in a timely way. So those periodic quizzes that I was talking about, they're 4 over the course of the semester. I will drop the lowest quiz grade, so if you happen to perform poorly on a quiz, or if you missed a quiz, that would be the quiz that's dropped. If you do well on the first 3 quizzes, many students elect just to drop the 4th and last quiz. Quizzes are 10 questions long, and they are multiple choice, short answer, true, false, in an open book situation. And because I dropped the lowest grade, generally speaking, no makeup quizzes will be given. So before I get into some of the specifics of the class, I wanted to talk about the Institutional Services Disability Statement. So if you are a returning student to GCC, you're probably familiar with this. That Greenfield Community College values inclusion and equal access to its programs and activities, and is committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. Our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. So if there are elements or aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement, please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need reasonable academic accommodations, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And the contact information is there. So over the course of the semester, these are the following principles we'll be examining in terms of speech delivery. Discovering and limiting the topic. Now, I've given you general topics, whether it's autobiographical or informative or persuasive, but of course you're going to have to refine those. And then you're going to have to decide how do you limit it so that you can talk about it in the time allotted. Adapting to the audience. Now, you have a certain advantage because your audience will be your classmates and myself. So already you've got a great wealth of information. You're speaking to adults and a college-educated audience. That in and of itself indicates what you can do in speech in a way that you wouldn't necessarily know if you were speaking to a general audience that might include, let's say, children in addition to adults, or non-college as well as college participants. Gathering information. So for your final speech, the persuasive speech, you will be required to use outside resources, and we'll talk about how you would document that in the context of presenting your speech. So you might elect to do that with your first speech, the autobiographical, though I deliberately chose a topic that you don't need to do research on. I suspect you know your life history pretty well. You might want to gather information for the informative speech, but I usually recommend, especially in highly condensed classes like this one, that you share with us information that you already have some knowledge of, just to save time. But when it comes to the persuasive speech, which is perhaps the most difficult speech to deliver because this is about people's beliefs, and which are sometimes very highly subjective and embedded, that giving outside resources helps in terms of being persuasive. Organizing and outlining, probably one of the most important things you can do with a speech, much like with writing, is in all of the prep work, all of the work that you don't see ahead of time. Developing an acceptable style suiting purpose and occasion. So what is the situation? What is the occasion? Why are you delivering the speech? And what's appropriate for that moment and that time and that place? practicing and presenting the speech, and you will be given an opportunity to practice if you so wanted to with me. And presenting the speech, as I said, you would all be recording yourselves, much like I'm recording myself, and posting that onto our Moodle site so that your peers could view. And coping with communication apprehension. Everybody feels anxious. That's part of the reality of delivering speeches. It's not even necessarily a bad thing. Anxiety means that you have some investment in a particular activity. But how to control it is the key. And keep in mind that this is a public speaking class, not an editing class. So I don't want you to splice together multiple videos so that you've got the perfect speech. The perfect speech does not exist. This is a one take only situation, both for myself and also for you. That's not to preclude all of the practice that you would do ahead of time, but the idea is that you are not splicing together different elements from different speeches. It's a one take. And lastly, active listening, because you will learn not just by delivering your own speech, but watching and listening to the speeches of your peers. So, as I said, you'll each deliver 3 graded speeches. One is autobiographical, one is informative, one is persuasive. Autobiographical is 5 minutes, informative is 10 minutes, persuasive is 15 minutes. And we'll talk about the guidelines for all 3 of these speeches as the semester progresses. I don't expect you to remember all of this. I just wanted to give you an overview of the semester as a whole. And certainly you can access this in the syllabus and other documents folder. Students will select their specific topics with assistance from the instructor. So I want to know what it is that you're going to be talking about and making sure that that's appropriate. Outlines are going to be required of all of the speeches. So we will talk about how to construct an outline, which is very open-ended. There are lots of different ways to do it. Definitely you want to have an outline, something in front of you. I kind of liken it to the trapeze that a trapeze net that a trapeze artist might use. A good trapeze artist doesn't fall, so they don't need to fall into the net. But they would be foolish not to perform with the net because you never know what could happen. And I see the same with note taking. You want it there just in case you need to reference your place if your mind wanders or there's an interruption. But if you're very well prepared, you may not even need to look at your look at your outline because, well, you're so familiar with the material, but it should be there in front of you. And actually, I've got my class notes serving as my outlines for all of the class videos that I will be posting over the course of the semester. The outlines will be evaluated informally on a checkmark system. So an excellent is a plus, good is a check plus, a satisfactory is a check, less than satisfactory is a check minus, unsatisfactory is minus. So basically what you will see is that I will be giving a quick overview of your outlines, and really the way to test if you have a successful outline is have you been able to deliver a successful speech. I think of it as a map. Certainly you can deviate from the map, but there are risks from deviating from the map. So attendance, or as I said, there will also be an opportunity, to submit optional ungraded draft outlines or speeches for feedback if you wanted to get my feedback. So attendance, class activity, and discussion that you'll be doing in those discussion forums is extremely important, can be made up. So absences and tardiness will be negatively reflected in your participation grade, and excessive absences could even result in failure. Consultations, as I said before, you can meet with me by appointment. I have a section here on conduct and demeanor. It's never been an issue, but I thought it's something that I should mention, that each speech is the equivalent of an examination. Both the presenter and the audience should treat it with appropriate respect. Inappropriate disruptions and responses will be negatively reflected in your participation grade. So I'm going to skip the section on plagiarism because I can address that next class, and instead go to the grading section, which is about approximate percentages. That approximately 10% is your class participation, so that's responding to the class form. 10% are those outlines that you will be submitting to me for quick review for the 3 speeches you'll be delivering. So you should not be delivering a speech without an outline. And I want to see the outline you actually use when you deliver your speech, not the outline you think I want to see. That's really the only way that you're going to find a way to do an outline that would be truly useful to you when you are delivering a speech. Speech number 1, that 5-minute autobiographical speech, 20%. Speech number 2, that 10-minute informative speech, 20%. Speech number 3, that 15-minute persuasive speech, 20%, equaling 100%. For an A, excellent, a B, good, a C, satisfactory, and yes, there is a D for poor and F for failing, but I prefer not to talk about those last 2 letters, especially on the first day of class. So let's just focus on the first 3. So now I wanted to go to the course outline because the syllabus just basically gives you an overview of the course. The course outline lists what it is we're going to be doing over the course of the semester and when. And again, I encourage you to take a hard copy of this. And I've got a couple of notes at the top, a couple of caveats that dates and assignments might be subject to change. And readings should be completed before the dates indicated, ideally, because the dates indicated are the dates that I'm going to be talking about that material. So today you'll see with week 1 on the 16th is devoted just to introduction, my introducing the class to you. If at all possible, by Thursday the 18th, if you could read the first 3 chapters. And I would very much appreciate that. But that said, one of the things that you are going to be seeing is that ultimately, even if you don't have the readings done before class, that ultimately I will be talking about the major elements in the readings. So that should be very helpful to you, but it would make more sense if you had done them before that. So chapter 1 is the need for public speaking. Chapter 2 is different perspectives. Chapter 3 is speech anxiety. There might be a different listing of chapters in previous editions. And as I said, the previous editions have a lot of the same content, but the new edition will have additional content. And if you can't get a copy of the new edition, I at least will be covering that in the class videos. So, and sometimes I've gone out of order with the new edition, but mostly I've kept to the order that has been outlined, where we next talk about understanding, audience analysis, and generating ideas. I skipped finding and using supporting materials, which is chapter 6, for when we actually need that information, which would be perhaps for the second speech, but certainly for the third. And then organizing and outlining, introductions, conclusions, and transitions, and language. Delivery and practice, that's going to be very important. And in fact, so much so that I'm going to have you review that chapter before your second speech and before your third speech, even though we would have covered it before your first speech. Talking about visual media for our second speech, which happens to be in chapter 12, because for your second speech, you will be required to use some sort of audio visual. And of course, chapter 13, speeches to inform, should be very helpful to you when you are delivering an informative speech. And then finally, chapter 14, speeches to persuade, which will be very helpful to you when you're putting together persuasive speech and also diversifying speeches. So you can see that I've got listed on the course outline the dates in which these chapters are going to be assigned, as well as the dates in which you will be posting your speeches, as well as the dates in which you should be submitting reviews of peer speeches. And again, dates and assignments might be subject to change, but it should all work out so that by the ending of the semester, we've talked about everything. And you can see that I've also included a speech rating sheet that talks a little bit about how your speeches will be evaluated, or at least your first speech, which is basically just an overview of the major elements of what we are going to be talking about. You've probably noticed by looking at the course outline that I put most of the readings up front because I thought they would be very helpful to you in terms of putting together your first speech and all of the following speeches. So we'll do that first, and then we'll focus on actually posting speeches. And that said, I don't even bother to use that speech rating sheet for the second speech or the third speech. At that point, I just take notes of strengths and weaknesses with the speeches you're delivering and submit that to you privately. So that basically is an overview of the semester as a whole. So again, if you can have the first 3 chapters read, that's lovely for next class, but I've also anticipated that you might not be able to do so. I know people are adding and dropping, getting textbooks, so don't panic. I've basically I've prepared for that. And my hope, though, is that everybody is settled in by the second week of the semester. Again, because this is a condensed semester. And after a few weeks, before you know it, we're done with the semester. So what's left is your attendance question for class. As I had indicated, I wanted you to be able to introduce yourself to the class. And feel free to upload video or audio or both, but not required. And that'll be your attendance for the class. And again, you're not required to respond to your classmates, but you're certainly encouraged to. And I will be responding to all of you. So next class, we'll begin to talk about, well, the textbook and some of the elements that we need to consider when we are preparing for delivering speech. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And certainly if you've got any questions or concerns about the class or any questions or concerns about anything that I've covered, please feel free to reach out to me. Take care. See you on Thursday, so to speak, though I am hoping to be able to post the night beforehand. Take care. Bye-bye.